Hey, it's TDA and welcome to this small guide on optimizing your base in Corsair's Cove. Because if you're anything like me and you just started playing and you ended up with a base that looks something like this with pretty much production all over the place, you might be making your way through the game just fine. But if you're like me and you kind of want to optimize how you're doing things, then there are some things to keep in mind. So let's go through them. First things first, if you want to rebuild your base, I would highly recommend that you fire your crew. That means you don't have to deal with their upkeep. You will take a pretty significant cohesion hit from firing your crew. Basically, they want to be on a ship, so yeah, you can blame them for that. But once you do this, you will take a hit to cohesion, but remember, you can always just build that back up. So it's completely up to you whether or not you want to do this, but this will make your life a lot easier. Planning out your actual pirate cove is going to be a lot easier once you turn on the information layer by pressing Alt. So you can check out where your buildings are. This is not the easiest way to find things, but you know, it's an option. But the most important thing is the deposits tab over here. So you can actually see where all your resources are coming from and where your fertile zones are. If I can just give you one tip that I think you should be taking into account from the beginning of the game, is that you don't want to build anything in your fertile zones that doesn't need to be there. For example, as you can see, I made the mistake of making a rope maker in my fertile zone, and that's just taking up precious space because some buildings can only be placed in a fertile zone, while pretty much every other building can be placed on the wall. So anything that doesn't need to be in a fertile zone should not be there. You want your woodcutters, as well as your pig herders, etc. You want those in your fertile zones, ideally as close together as you can, so you can put as many of them in the zone as possible, and then anything else should go on the wall. So a very simple but honestly already pretty optimized layout would be something like this. I am producing rum over here that requires sugarcane and barrels themselves need some hardwood in production. And I have my woodcutter and my sugarcane down here in the fertile area, nothing else. And everything else is on the wall. So you can see the cooper as well as the distillery are on the wall, and they are funneling straight into the warehouse, which brings me to my next point. Because due to where your resources are located, you might not be able to build anything close by, because, well, your resources might be on one side of the island while you need the end product on the other side of the island. I would generally recommend to build your production lines close to wherever the actual base resources are, so you don't have any transportation issues at the beginning of your production chain, and then use your warehouses to do the actual transporting for you. So in this example, I'm producing the rum over here. I'm collecting that. That also makes sure that any overflow of production is just stocked up. That's always a nice thing to have. But then I also use warehouses to collect those resources wherever they need to go. This means that both the receiving as well as the sending warehouse have their own fletchers, and the more connections you add, the more fletchers you will have in this warehouse. And then it's extremely cheap to just enable all hands on deck, doubling all of that. Now, of course, this is going to cost you more drifters. It's also going to cost you more food, but that's very cheap and easy to produce. And this is going to allow you to transport massive amounts of stuff across the island to go wherever you need it to go. Then, as a next step to further optimize your production chains, look at the in and output ratios. So, for example, over here, I am producing 12 of these barrels per minute, and I need a total of 4 hardwood per minute in order to do that. Now, a base woodcutter is already capable of producing 8 per minute. It's not right now doing that because it's actually not using 8 per minute, but that means I could build 2 of these coopers for a single woodcutter and still have everything producing at a optimal rate. Now, then of course you do need to look at the end product as well. I need 4 barrels per minute in order to get this distillery up and running. And because this is already producing 12, I can actually build 3 distilleries for every single cooper. So doing that math, a single woodcutter can then supply 2 coopers, which can then supply a total of 6 distilleries making rum. Now, the problem here is going to be the sugarcane, because we actually have 4 sugarcane coming in order to end up with 1 distillery functioning completely well, and that's exactly what a base sugarcane is also producing. So in order to, supplement the production of that 12 distilleries, I would also need 12 sugarcane farms. And that's why you need to make sure you're not building stuff on your fertile areas if you can help it. Now, actually, that holds for the base pirate bases as well, because the pirate bases, as I can show you over here, you can stick them on the wall just fine, and that means that ideally you should want to do that. The only downside of putting a base on this side of the wall is that makes it harder to cover a large area efficiently, so that means you're going to be building more of these, but at the same time that's not really a problem, because you can just have the pirate bases overlapping a little bit. Just make sure that if you open up additional angles of attack, you're still defending those. In order to optimize your fertile production, I would also recommend that you make sure you build next to the wall early on, because that allows you to make sure you're not actually interfering with your other production chain. So it's very easy to start building, for example, a distillery like here, but that's not going to allow you to place anything down on the ground. So you want to raise your building a little bit up before you place it, so it doesn't actually get in the way of the stuff that needs to be below it. And this is what a more optimized version of a rum distillery looks like. So I have a total of 3 distilleries, all being supplied by a single cooper. I have 3 sugarcane farms, all feeding into those distillery, 1 each. And even now I'm still wasting half of my woodcutter production, but honestly that could either go to, for example, a sawmill where we're producing planks, which happens to use exactly the remaining production over here. So if you want to have some more building materials at hand, that's a way to go. Or you can just leave it as it is. Now, with all of this set up, I am already producing 60 rum per minute, which is a lot. But we can, of course, also just decide to overclock all of this with the all hands on deck, thereby increasing my production by 50% at the cost of doubling all my upkeep. This is a very space-efficient way of doing that, but it's even better if you take into consideration the Entertainers Guild Hall. The Entertainers Guild Hall is located in the notoriety path in the 3rd level, and this building is pretty expensive, but what it does is increase your production from the all hands on deck boost from plus 50 to plus 80%. Now, the 30% is already really nice, because that means that now you're pretty much doubling the production out of your buildings, but the last line here is super important. This boost does not increase production input. So basically that 30% additional production that you get is completely free. Now, on top of that, what you need to do in order to make full advantage of the all hands on deck is make sure you enable that in all of your buildings in the production chain, because we were utilizing them completely. So that means we are not creating an additional bottleneck somewhere. But if I do all of that, each of these buildings can now produce up to 36 rum per minute, where we were producing just 20 per minute before. So that's almost double, without adding any buildings to the mix or any cost to the mix, other than, you know, placing down this Entertainers Guild Hall. Now, the Entertainers Guild Hall will be used on everything that you have the all hands on deck buff enabled. So if you have additional production chains within the reach of this guild hall, those will benefit from that as well. So you only have to build that once per zone. Expanding on that idea, I recommend that every galley has a dedicated warehouse, so you can transport the food to where it needs to go and then have an efficient route to your galley. And then remember, there's deeds to do exactly that, so that makes that extremely easy to do. And similarly, I would recommend that every one of your peers has a dedicated tavern that also then has a dedicated warehouse where you're importing whatever booze you need and then transport that directly into your tavern. This just makes it very easy to keep track of where your stuff is going, and also make sure that you can build, for example, moonshine stills and other buildings that don't really need to be in a specific place, just kind of out of the way of your other production centers. The same goes for housing. Try to build that somewhere out of the way. That has 2 advantages. First of all, it doesn't take up space that you want to use for something else, of course, but it also makes it very easy to upgrade that later. If you start out with the basic housing first, that only supplies you with 2 housing for every house you build, and then you can later on start upgrading to the larger versions of those houses. They will take up more space, but it's extremely easy then just delete all your housing and fit in the new houses accordingly. Now, don't underestimate how much these small optimizations are going to be worth it. I actually pretty much tripled the output of my entire base by doing this, and I've only used a slightly more personnel than I did before, and compared to the amount of resources I'm now producing, it is far more efficient than anything I've done before. And on top of that, I was able to clear out a lot of that fertile space that I was using before for buildings that actually don't need it to be there. So I have plenty of room now to expand, while before, for example, my central base where I started out was really cramped. I now have production for several different resources and I still have space left over. So again, don't underestimate how much this little bit of optimization is going to make your life so much easier to crew all your ships to the max. And just look at all of that production that I now have available. Some of them actually came to a standstill because I have several thousand resources now in my stocks, but I'm not currently actively using them. So, you know, the production rates that you're seeing on the screen now are actually much higher. They're just bottlenecked by the fact that I have not enough space to use them. Anyway, just a little bit of a guide there. I hope you found this useful. If you did, make sure to like this video because it really helps me out, and don't forget to subscribe for more content. I will be making more guides on this game, and I have currently a full playthrough going on as well, in case you want to play along. Either way, if you're still here, you are awesome, and I definitely hope to catch you in the next one.